Namaste. In this lecture, we'll be discussing about joint structure, and we shall be knowing that what are the components, what actually joint is, how it works. We'll talk that what could be the reason of injuries and all, what are the problems that happens to the joint while we exercise, and how daily lifestyle can affect the joint health. So whenever it comes to movement is important for the body, right? Because movement helps you circulate the blood, movement helps you strengthen, movement helps you make your body feel much more energized and rejuvenated. Movement helps you become flexible, movement helps you become much more dynamic and mobile, and you feel much more free, right? So when it is about movement, it's important to know about a joint. So what is a joint? Joint can also be said as articulation. Joint can be known as articulation. Articulation means where things connect, right? So joint is actually a junction. It is a junction where two or more than two bones will meet. So let's say your elbow. So elbow joint is about your forearm bones and your upper arm bone. So before we go through the joints, let me quickly give you the idea of all the bones into the body. So today I shall be giving you idea about the upper body bones, and in the next lecture we will talk about lower body bones. So starting from my head, so overall this is called skull. This is called skull. So if you want to write it down, you can say skull. Well, there are, of course, how many bones do we have in the body? When we are born, there are around 300 bones, but at the end, when fusing happens to the bone, maximum bones number we have, it is 206. Now this bone is called skull overall. Of course there are 50 to 60 bones in that, but we'll only talk about major bones, so it's easy and simple for you. You can also Google it and learn about these bones. So skull, and then we have in the whole area of skull, we have only one bone which moves. This is called jawbone, and we call it mandible. Mandible is our jawbone, and this is the only bone that moves and where there is connection. This joint is movable joint, right? Then we have our spine. Let's not talk about too much about it. So the whole center of the body, where your body is being held into the position, the spine is the axis of that. Now spine gives attachment to your rib cage. So I'm just writing it the major names of the upper body. So then we have a spine in the center. Spine connects to rib cage, right? Then rib cage, if you see rib cage from front, it connects to the chest bone, and this bone is called sternum. Sternum, S-T-E-R-N-U-M. Sternum is the bone of your chest. Now sternum connects to the collarbone, the bone that pops out here, and this bone is called clavicle. Clavicle is our collarbone. Then clavicle goes to the shoulder joint, and here we have two major bones. So we have shoulder blade here behind, which is floating bone. Shoulder blade is known as scapula. So scapula is the bone which floats on the back. It does not connect on the spine. It connects to the collarbone, and collarbone connects to the sternum, right? Now shoulder joint is about collarbone, which is clavicle. It is about scapula, which is your shoulder blade, and then we have funny bone here. Funny bone here is known as humerus. Well, why I said it is funny? Because it is humerus. So humerus is our upper arm bone. Right here we only have one bone. Biceps and triceps are the big muscle which are covering your humerus. Now talking further, humerus comes to the elbow, and it is attached with your little finger side bone, and then we have two bones into the forearm. These bones are called radius and ulna. Radius, R-A-D-I-O-S. So radius is the bone which is toward your thumb side. Radius, right. Ulna, small finger, small name, ulna. So ulna is the bone which is towards your from the elbow to the little finger, the bone comes is called ulna. After ulna into the wrist joint, we have tiny bones. These bones are called carpals. So carpals are the bone which are at the wrist. Then beyond the carpals, the invisible finger bones here, the bones we have here are called metacarpals. And then at the end, all the fingers are called phalange or phalanges. So the finger bones are called phalanges. Before finger are called metacarpals. Then we have carpals bones. Then we have radius and ulna. Then we have humerus. Then we have collarbone called clavicle. Then we have shoulder blade called scapula. Then we have chest bone called sternum. Then sternum connects to the rib cage. Rib cage from behind connects to the middle back spine, and spine is supporting the skull. So this is like the upper body anatomy of the bones, all right? Now into the lower body, we'll talk in the next session. But right now I would like to give some idea about this. So I'm going to clean this board here for this. So you don't really need to see the names on here. You can also Google it. Oh, you can just see a picture and you'll have all the names. I just told you the major names which you should know in general. Now, some facts about bones. Well, bones are really rigid, but they are rigid because you put stress on them, right? So there is an age which is called peak bone mass. Peak bone mass means this is the age where your bone will grow in length to its max, which is between 18 to 25. When you cross this age, you can't really grow your height unless there is some hormonal imbalances. Otherwise, most of the people will gain their maximum height prior or before 25 is for sure. Now, some people may stop gaining height after 20 or 23. Some people remain short, and once they reach 18 and more, they suddenly grow their height. Now, it happens because of peak bone mass and hormonal changes into the body. Now, once you cross this age, you may still get stronger with the bones and you may lose the bone density, but you will not get shorter or longer. The length is set now, right? Now, if you are in the peak bone mass, the growth into the bones happens the best. So it means if you are in this age or before this age, if you do a lot of strengthening workout, that could be helpful for you in future. Strengthening workout doesn't always mean to have big muscles, but strengthening workout could mean running. Not too hard, but running, jogging, or walking, doing trackings, or doing some stressful body exercises. Stressful means, let's say, gym, lifting some weight, not really heavy, but doing weight training could really be helpful for a person for their old age, because when they are in the age of peak bone mass, they have an advantage of growing their body really strong. Because let's say once you cross the age of 40, after that it really the density of the bones or even muscle mass cannot be easily gained. You have to struggle a lot more. Even you can't become so flexible when you do some movement or exercise very late in your life. And especially if you have crossed the age of 50, then this process goes even low. Once you cross the age of 40, somewhere 2% of your bone mass start to reduce if you don't exercise well. And once you cross the age of 60, this is the age where surely you cannot gain more strength. The only thing you can do is, so it's like, something goes to the peak and now it start to come down. So let's say maximum 40 is the age when you may keep on growing yourself with the strength and, with the density of the bone and muscles. But after that, this process cannot really become fast. Not really, I'm setting the peak here, but it may be 30, it may be 50 for some people. But once you cross this age, you can't really grow stronger now. But what you can do is you can slow down the process of, becoming weaker. So slow down the process means if you keep on exercising, if you keep on doing, weight training, or if you keep on doing movement exercises and all, the body mass lost process could become slower, and injuries and weight loss and problems like that could be avoided. So let's say Let's say you are the person who've been very lazy, not you but in general. Let's say if there is a person who's been lazy in this age, he used to, well, before, people, when technology was less, right, we used to run, we used to go to mountains, we used to go to swimming. Of course today people go, but today's kids are much more busy. Most of the kids are busy playing video games, or playing with computer and things like that. When they're too much involved in technology, they don't sometimes really care about their body, and especially they most of the time eat junk food, they eat acidic, and they don't really stress their body enough. When that happens, if somebody is like this, and if he has gone beyond 30 doing nothing, once he reaches the age of 50, he can have so many problems with his joints and with his muscles, and he could be prone to injury. It's because he did not take advantage of this age. So once you cross the age 50, after that, of course, you can always exercise, but you may have to take a lot of precautions. You may have to do exercise more like a therapy, not really for strengthening yourself to become fit, but to avoid injuries, right? You may be exercising because you have pain, you may be exercising because you feel stiff, but exercises to strengthen yourself, to become flexible, well, such idea may have been gone by then. So it's important that when we are in this age, we let our kids involved in physical exercises, let them become strong and flexible, allow them to reach, move different ways, let them do trekking, let them run, let them go walk mountain, let them go swim into the river or wherever. Because when you try to do things late, you may be doing it just to satisfy yourself, but actually it will not really work so well. So we must take advantage of peak bone mass, because when you are, especially to the women in India, I would say women in India generally have bone mass problem in their later lives, because throughout their life, most of the women who do not really prefer working out, they have been a housewife who just cooks at home, washes the dishes, and uh, cooks the food, washes the dishes, washes the clothes and all. If this is the job of a common woman, well, in India generally men also have such lifestyle, but they are more sedentary, they are working on laptop and computer. If such is your lifestyle, and if you don't make time for your physical workout, your bone may become brittle and weak, because bones only, or body only becomes stronger when you make it struggle for something. So let's say if I have never lifted 10 pounds in my whole life, I never lifted anything, I never jumped, I never ran, I just walk gently. So if I just walk, I only walk, I don't even walk uphill, I don't even walk up straight, I just prefer walking on flat surface. So someday if I have to run, maybe running could be injurious to my knees. Maybe if I jumping would be injurious to my knees. If I do some weightlifting, let's say I try to lift 15 pounds, that could crack my lower back, and things like that could happen. So it's important, if you want to get stronger, you must put stress upon the body through weight or through some exercises and movement, which will give you strength. Same, bones become stronger when you put stress onto them, but it doesn't mean that you bring something and put weight onto the bones. No, you don't do that. When you do exercises, movement, when you, let's say if I want to keep my elbow strong, so I don't have to do something for my elbow, I just have to do something for my muscles around the elbow. So let's say if I do this exercise with dumbbells, and I do this exercise with dumbbell, I do push-ups, I do pull-ups, I do some shoulder movement. So when I work on the muscles around the elbow, my elbow automatically will start to feel safer and stronger. So if you have heard of the issues like osteoporosis, osteomyelitis, things like that, osteo related to bone, and porosis is when bone mass start to lose, and the firmness from the bone is lost and start to become brittle and weak. It generally happens because of lack of physical activities, and also it happens because of too acidic diet. So we have talked about this before, that if you consume a lot of acidic food, especially with men, it'll happen, because with women in menstruation, the blood gets cleaner and the excess amount of acid that they eat generally gets wiped out. But if in the same case, if you perform less activities, if you don't like to involve in physical exercises, then you may face osteoporosis, where the bone mass is lost in future, especially in old age, and you may feel very weak. Even sometimes, if you If you've jumped, that could even be injurious for your bones into the hip, especially hip fracture, fracture of your shin bone, elbow fracture, and things like that. Forearm fracture could be very common among people who involve less in physical activities. So we must take care of that by involving our, involving exercise into our routine. And it's not that people who love to exercise should love, but exercise should be the routine of our, life routine. It should be in our routine. Like the way, if we eat food, we should also be involved in physical activity. If we work, we should also be involved in physical activity. So physical activity is important for everyone, no matter what age. But depending upon age, we should be doing it according to the need and intentions we have towards the exercise. So when bones, so there are different types of joint into the body, okay? I'll not be really talking about them, but let's say we have, as I mentioned, that there are around 50 to 60 bones into the skull. But these bones are connected so much that there is not space. So these joints can't move. But here is the joint where there is space. So I'm going to talk about the joint where movement happens. Otherwise, those kind of joint we don't really need to know about right now. So this is a kind of joint. Let's say this is your knee, okay? This could be your elbow or any joint. Generally, knee has 3 bones, elbow has 3 bones. But right now, just giving a general idea of joint. So joint is a junction where 2 or maybe more than 2 bones meet. So when 2 bones meet, first thing is they can never, they have nothing to connect. They can't connect themselves, right? Your muscles don't connect the bones. Remember this. What connects the bone is the special tissue there, and this is called ligament. So we can say that ligament connect bone to bone. So ligament is like, it's like a bridge between 2 ends of the river. So if your elbow is in the position, see, it makes sense that if I keep my muscles strong, then my elbow feels that it will not break. It's because muscles support it. But let's say I keep my muscles totally relaxed, still my elbow doesn't break. It doesn't break because there are strong steel wire like structure which is called ligament. Ligament are white in color. They're white in color because they do not have rich blood flow to them. Ligaments are very strong. They do not have enough blood flow. Not enough, but they do not have rich blood flow. This is why we say that if you injure your ligament, chances of healing, not chances, but duration of healing is much longer than if bone gets fractured. If bone gets fractured, also depends upon how intense or how severe the fracture is. But if there is a small fracture, bone has very immense amount of blood circulation to it, and a lot of bleeding happens, and that will with time, like 3-4 weeks or maximum 6 weeks, your bone will get fixed. But if your ligament is torn a little bit, which is called sprain, ligament injury is called sprain. So when your ligament gets injured, it is called sprain. So sprain is a ligament injury. So we'll talk that why ligament gets injured, but first let's understand what more it does. The job of ligament is to connect bone to bone and to stabilize joint. So it has 2 basic jobs. It stabilizes joint and connect bone, and third, it allows for movement. So if you can allow, and on top of that, it also restrict movement. So ligament into the joint allows for movement and also restrict the movement, right? So let's say I want to move my elbow. This is my elbow straightening, this is my elbow bending. Now my elbow straighten. Now if I keep my muscle tight, it makes sense that if I keep my muscle tight, my elbow will not straighten because muscle is holding the joint. But if I relax the muscle and I try to straighten my elbow more, why it doesn't straighten more? One reason is ligament itself. Ligament restricts the movement, but it doesn't restrict it because it is bad. It restricts it because it wants the joint to feel stabilized. Because if ligament do not hold your bones into the point and hold it to restrict the movement, maybe you can break the elbow easily. You know, some people have so hyper flexible or too stretchy ligaments, or not weak we cannot say, but they are so long and so flexible that sometimes their elbows are hyperextended, their shoulder can rotate extreme, they can, you know, turn their shoulder in any position. You may have seen some weird movements on internet. So ligament, we should never target ligament. Means if you want to get stronger, you don't have to think of ligament, you just have to think of movement and muscle gain. So if your muscle becomes stronger, your joint will become stronger, your ligament will become stronger. Ligament is a part of joint. So if you're putting pressure to the muscles, automatically pressure is going through the joint, and when the pressure goes towards the joint, ligament has to hold the bones into the place and it has to create more tension, and that force or stress gives it more strength. So if you're doing any exercise, you do deadlift, you do jumping, running, all those exercises not only strengthen your muscles, but they also strengthen your bones, they strengthen your ligaments, they strengthen your cartilage, and everything. It makes it stronger. Now we have to understand that a very important job of a ligament is stabilize. A stabilization is very important job of a ligament. What it means is that since ligaments stabilize you, and if you make them too stretchy, if you stretch the ligaments, which is not so easy, but of course we do it in many joints, like our knee we do it. So let's say if you straighten the knee, right? If you straighten the knee, imagine my elbow is my knee. If I straighten my knee with some force, it feels that it can't straighten more. And if you force it more somewhere, you're putting pressure to the ligament. So actually you are making your ligament pull. Ligament are not really there to stretch. They do stretch very little, but they are not really there to stretch. But if you keep on forcing repeatedly, if you stretch the ligament, they can gain extra length. And when they will gain the length, they will somewhere make the joint become more mobile, and that mobility may be making you lose the stability. So make sure that you don't target your ligaments. So how to avoid ligament stretching? It's very important to understand. Ligament stretching could be avoided by not letting the joint go into extreme range. One. Second, do not let the joint go in extreme and keep your muscles relaxed. So let's say I want to take my shoulder back, and if I totally relax my muscles, of course my shoulder will go back. But if it is going back because of some force, remember active and passive movement. If I take my hands sideways back, it's fine for me. But if somebody else is doing this for me and I remain totally relaxed, maybe that could lead to overstretching of ligament. It may be stretching my muscle too much. It can even compress my joint. So make sure when somebody is doing for you, keep your muscle little tense so the pressure does not go to joint, but it comes to the muscles, which is okay. If you stretch the muscle, it becomes flexible, and that's what we want. But if you stretch the ligament, it can also become flexible, but will take longer. But that flexibility is not really needed. That flexibility will make you much more mobile. Yes, if you are really stiff, if you are very stiff that your elbow can't even straighten, yes, then we say that of course you should do some movement. With constant practice of straightening slowly, maybe 2 to 3 years if you constantly do, then maybe it will improve. But if your joint can reach normal range, but if you don't reach the normal range when you're in different position, let's say you're doing wheel pose. You're doing wheel pose, which is back bend. You lie down on the back and then you lift your chest and hip up using your hands and feet. If you're doing that pose and you can't straighten your elbow in that position, it's not because your joint doesn't move. It's basically because you lack the strength. And when you lack the strength and you try to straighten your elbow there, it's okay for you because you are actually straightening the elbow, which you already can do, but you are unable to do it there because the position requires more strength. So if you are unable to straighten the elbow because you lack the strength, you build the strength. Let's say sometime you're doing some exercises where you're unable to straighten the elbow because you feel tight. You become flexible, but your elbow is already straight if it is, and you try to force it to straighten more. This is the point where ligament gets stretched. So ligament will get stretched, or ligament will have tension more when your joint is already moved maximum, then you force it more. So let's say your knee can straighten 180 degrees and you push it to straighten more, which sometimes people do unconsciously while they are doing any forward bend or one leg forward bend if they are doing. So they force their knee to the floor by pulling the kneecap up, and that can make the knee feel worse. In future, they can also make their knee become more mobile which is not really needed, but it will lead to instability of the joint. So we have to understand this, that do not stretch the ligament. Well, I would like to mention here that what are the reason of injury to the ligament. Ligament injury will happen basically because of one primary reason, and this reason is our jerk or jerky movement. So jerky movement is the primary reason of injury to the ligament. So example, if you have heard of ankle sprain, why it happens? It will not happen if you just move your ankle like this. Imagine it is my ankle. But let's say I'm walking and I suddenly twist my ankle. So sudden movement where I did not have control over, where my muscles are not strong enough, that could lead to ligament injury of the ankle. And when that happens, it causes a sprain. When sprain takes place, inflammation happens, bleeding happens, and then we have to take rest. It causes a lot of pain. Depending upon how severe is that. If it is a little, it will go away in 2-3 days, but if it is really severe, you may have to keep your foot stable for some days and weeks even. Sometimes it even takes surgery to repair that. We have seen that you may have heard of knee ligament injury, which we call ACL. ACL, PCL, LCL, MCL are ligaments of knee, right? So if, let's say, how ligament injury happened to the knee, let's say you jumped and you jumped on the twisted knee or rotated knee, or you jumped on, when you jumped, your body weight did not go to the foot, but your body weight from knee went to floor, and that jerk made the ligament suddenly stretch, and that sudden jerky movement make the ligaments torn. And when ligament got torn, well, if the ligament is completely torn, sometimes we may need to go through surgery. If it is not completely torn or partially torn, well, chances of, well, of course, it's much more curable. You have to, take care of your knee, keep it stable, make sure you strengthen your muscles and don't mobilize this too much with force. Do very gentle movement. Of course, there is a cure, flow to that. We'll talk about that after this. Right now, just letting you know that what is the reason. Other reason of ligament injury is forcing joint at maximum range of motion. So if your joint is already at the maximum range, let's say my elbow is already 180 degrees and I'm doing any position where I'm trying to force my elbow, and I'm unconsciously not really knowing that whether I'm trying to improve the posture or whether I'm forcing my elbow. That could lead to hyperextension of the elbow in future, which will lead to instability. Maybe on the spot it could be injurious to the elbow. Sometimes, let's say I'm doing some posture, example, I'm doing any pose where I have to raise my hand back up, and well, if I do it myself, which is active, which is not generally going to be jerky, which is not going to be forceful, if I create force from my own body to do some movement which is active, chance of injury will be less, because my own muscles will never pull my joint to extreme point. Even if they pull it, this will still be under the criteria of the joint movement. But if the force that you use at the maximum range of motion at any joint, if the force is external means if it is gravity and too much force, if it is some other person forcing you, or sometimes if it is momentum, that could also lead to ligament injury. So if you want to keep your ligament safe, make sure whenever you are exercising, try to avoid jerky movements first. You can start moving slow first, then make the movement in your control. When you have good control, when you have made the pattern of the movement, then try to bring some intensity or speed to that. But don't you start some exercise with forceful movement. Like if you want to warm up your legs to stretch and do a better forward bend, don't start with kicking the leg really high, because kicking the leg will be jerky movement. Not only in jerky movement you injure your ligament, but also you can injure your muscles, right? So same, if I want to, well, I would give you a very good example of it. So let's say I have never thrown something, right? You may have experienced this. Let's say you have never thrown something very hard, okay? But someday, you have a stone and you try to throw that really strong. Many people injure their shoulder on the spot. On the spot, they can injure their shoulder. Sometimes ligament can be torn, but sometimes even the muscle gets injured because you have done jerky movement which you have no control and you haven't practiced it before. Well, jerky movements are not always bad, but they are bad to start with. They are bad when you do not have control. They are bad when you are not prepared for that and when you haven't practiced that before. But if you want to do jerky movement or force your joint, first of all, you should never force your joint when it is already maximum. Force your joint only when they are bent, but because of certain tension, they cannot straighten. Example, if I give you the example of my knee, see my knee, it can straighten, right? It can straighten, but if I bring my knee to the chest, my knee doesn't straighten. Is it not straightening because my joint problem? Not really. It is not straightening because I lack the strength. Or if I do forward bend with bent knee, I can easily keep my spine straight. If I keep my spine straight and try to straighten the knee, my knees don't straighten. It's not because my knee has some problem. It's because muscles that are working with the knee are tight. And if a muscle is tight, or if on the other side the muscle is weak, in both cases the joint will not come to its maximum range. This is why if you want to work with flexibility, strength and mobility, don't target a joint, target the muscles to come into the maximum range, because the moment you reach the maximum range, it is for the joint, but sometimes when you don't reach it, you don't reach it because of lack of strength and lack of flexibility. So work upon the muscles, do not target the joint. I have already told you before. But sometimes if you want to target the joint to make it become more mobile and flexible, because sometimes we are very flexible, but our joint has already reached the maximum. That's why sometimes we say that we can't perform all the poses, especially if you have reached the age of 30. After that, most of the poses become difficult because your body has adopted certain position. Sometimes structure of the body doesn't allow you to do. In such cases, it is okay to do gentle forces. Let's say my wrist doesn't bend more than 90 degrees, okay? It doesn't mean that I put weight on my wrist and I try to do handstand and then I bend my wrist. That's not a good idea because it is too much weight. And that force to my maximum range of my wrist could lead to maybe wrist compression too much. It could lead to ligament injury and joint pain. How to do that is, I will try to bend my wrist with my active effort and I can try to do force, but the force I'm trying must come and should only come from my strength of my body only. So for today, for this lecture, we shall keep it to the ligament. Tomorrow we'll talk about further components and further about joint structure. Namaste.